So first, I'm going to do a very brief introduction to amazing Dr. Aradhna Tripati, and I am so fortunate to call all three of these amazing humans my friends. And Dr. Aradhna Tripati, who started taking college courses at 12 years old, by the way. So I wanted to come up with a really fun nugget about each one of these amazing individuals as I was writing their bios last night. So I'm gonna make this a little more interesting maybe. So she's a geoscientist, a climate scientist, a lifelong champion and activist for belonging, accessibility, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in STEM. Aradhna is a professor in the UCLA Institute of the Environment and Sustainability in the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences, and she holds joint appointments in multiple additional Earth, space, geophysics, and even nanosystem departments, as their work is highly interdisciplinary. She's also the founder and director of UCLA's Center for Diverse Leadership in Science, where she mentors, advises, and trains postdoc fellows and researchers, graduate and undergrad students, and even high school teachers and their students through CDLS. And Dr. Tripati has created a community of support and a home where diverse cadres of budding geoscientists come together, they innovate, share, and embrace one another in a safe, welcoming space where they can all thrive. And I've been there. I can tell you that is all true. Running an incredibly active, complex, and successful scientific lab while simultaneously recruiting, supporting, and advancing the next generation of diverse scholars and scientists into STEM, Dr. Tripati has contributed, excuse me, to countless citations and publications, shares their wisdom and expertise through a variety of high-level international venues each year, and has received numerous prestigious awards, the most recent being honored twice this year by AGU, receiving the Willie Dansgaard Award for being a paleoclimate pioneer and the AGU Ambassador Award for their achievements that go far beyond their scientific discipline, extending into societal impacts, scientific leadership, and the promotion of the next generation of talented geoscientists. Dr. Tripati was also recently elected as a fellow of the California Academy of Sciences, and we are deeply honored that she could take the time to join us today. Aradhna?
Thanks so much, Catalina, for that wonderful introduction. It's an honor to be following your inspiring keynote and to be in the company of these wonderful people in this room who are some of my mentors and role models. And I want to thank all of you who are part of this charrette for being present today. So my name is Aradhna Tripati and my pronouns are she, they. Just to position myself, I'll start off with a personal introduction. My parents immigrated here from the Fiji Islands, and they have some ancestry from India, as both countries were former colonies of Britain. And so my mom's parents grew sugarcane. She grew up in a place that was growing sugarcane on a plantation and was the first generation in her village to be literate. And both in Fiji and in this country, when my parents emigrated here, my family experienced a number of challenges and barriers, from colorism, racism, the impacts of sexism, incarceration, poverty, homelessness, and medical issues. And so these were things that were part of my experience when growing up, but also when I was an undergraduate, in graduate school, things became particularly punctuated in terms of impacts on my family, and they continue to this day. So in growing up, the first thing I remember wanting to be was actually a Supreme Court judge to help families like ours so they wouldn't go through some of the things we went through one day. And then in college, I went to a minority serving institution, Cal State LA, and I took classes in pre-law, political science, and then eventually had a realization that that probably wasn't for me. I ended up taking classes in pre-med. Thought maybe this would be another way that I could fill this goal to help people. And then in dissecting things, I realized that probably wasn't for me either. But then I took a general ed class on environmental geology and society and learned about how science-informed policy could save lives. And I thought, okay, well, this might be an interesting framework for bringing together different disciplines that I thought were interesting, and being able to spend time studying nature and helping to do science-informed policy work. But because of those experiences it was having, there were actually several elements that were really critical for my persistence. And I'll share three of them with you. The first one was having these professors that were mentors and role models that were human centered and that really saw me as a whole person with potential. Catalina described when I started taking college classes, obviously I was going to have huge gaps in my skills and my understanding time, but I had professors who believed in my potential. So Dr. Gary Novak, who taught mineral physics, but also at the same time showed my family incredible support when times were tough. And Dr. Pedro Ramirez, who taught me how to infer processes from the physical properties of rocks. But he also showed me how, as a child of immigrants from Mexico with parents who were farm workers in the Central Valley, that he could also relate to some of the challenges that my family faced. And then there was Dr. Stroll, a professor of gender and labor studies, who put a lot of the experiences that my family was having into this broader historical context when she talked about structural discrimination. And then in graduate school, although then I was in a predominantly white geosciences department, and there was a professor, Dr. Angela Davis, who was a social scientist, prison abolitionist. She reached out across disciplines to support women of color of different generations in higher education at UC Santa Cruz, including people in STEM. And in the space that she created, we were in community together whilst being academics. And that was a really important counter space from the dominant culture of my department. So I had ways to be in health in that space. So in addition to these professors and role models, I also benefited at critical times in my education from a diverse group of peers. I was part of that Women of Color research cluster that Dr. Davis led, but I was also part of other groups both before and after. Being at a minority serving institution as an undergraduate, I had opportunities with my peers to engage in discovery together, to learn, to study. We also did research, did outreach to support public engagement. We discussed social issues. And then as I navigated other spaces through my postdoc and then as a faculty member, the fact that I had those experiences at formative times in my socialization, that made me think that people like all of us actually belonged in higher education and in STEM, and that we all had potential, even when I got very explicit and implicit messaging that said otherwise. And so I took that with me. And that was a really important part of my kind of maintaining this sense that perhaps it wasn't me, but perhaps it was the environment and the culture that was unhealthy, even when I was in places where I experienced being the first. But a third critical element for my being able to persist was that I received financial support throughout higher education from the Gates Millennium Scholars Program and other programs. And that meant that I didn't have to drop out when times were tough. I raised my sister during graduate school. I had to work additional jobs to be able to send support home. But through that scholarship and different forms of aid that I was able to receive, I was able to access opportunities, and not just to study and do research, but also to engage in service and leadership, to think that the science that we were doing was actually meaningful. And it also taught me an important lesson about equitable access. So at UCLA, about 12 years ago when I started, I experienced being the first woman of color faculty member, the first dark-skinned professor in my 3 geoscience departments out of about 50 professors. And, the first things that I thought was, there's something that's not healthy here. And I started to see that there were norms that were present that in fact reflected the dominant exclusionary culture. And there were a series of harmful practices, stereotypes, and policies. So in that space, I began to work to be in community with others, to really work as a community organizer, to assert our values and to challenge policies, and worked with others to create counter spaces. And with this, after several years, really working to create a center that adapted some of our work to really think about institutional change. And for that work, for actually that entire journey from becoming a faculty member to starting the center, we collaborated with education researchers, with social scientists. We've always been women of color led. We have students and postdocs that are supported to be in leadership roles, along with staff, faculty, and community partners. And we really center health through the ecosystem that we have. We actually created an ecosystem of fellowship programs for the center, and we focus on healthy relationships. We draw on our lived experience. We contextualize with expertise, the literature, with practitioners, and we create really a counter space where we can express our own narratives about what science should be. And we really work to do our work to practice science in a compassionate and relational way. And we do this for our own health and well-being because our institutions are not reflecting our values. So I'll close by just saying that, we do our work really in 4 ways, and I view this work as being reparative in different ways. First, within the geosciences departments and within our institution. Secondly, across disciplines, not just across other STEM disciplines, but also through partnerships with ethnic studies, social sciences, humanities experts within our institutions. Third, we work on supporting healthy relationships across institutions, including at MSIs, HBCUs, how I actually met Vernon and have had the opportunity to learn from him, and also programs led at non-MSIs by scholars of color, like the work that Lisa does. And then finally, fourthly, with community organizations and tribal authorities. So with this, we really emphasize continuity of relationship, reciprocity, equity, and really steeping ourselves in the practice of healthy relationships and environments, what that should look like. And it is a challenging thing to do, but it is certainly very meaningful and rewarding. And what really moves me is what I see the next generation doing when they see those who are in leadership doing this. We give them cover because, and then what they do, what they see as our ceiling is their floor. And so the next generation of geoscience leaders, they are empowered and they have broader awarenesses and frameworks than we have had. And so watching them shine and what they create has been really the biggest gift of this all. So thank you.
Dr. Tripati, thank you so much for all of that and for sharing so much of your personal journey with us as well. And I know how much it informs your professional journey as well. So thank you for that. And we look forward to hearing more from you, excuse me, during the panel discussion.